After dying, Jesus revealed the shocking secret of the 3 days of darkness. Nicholas sat, hunched over the ancient text. Candles flickered, casting long dancing shadows on the dusty walls. The air in his small study felt thick, heavy with the scent of old parchment and a nameless dread. His breath hitched, a dry, raspy sound in the oppressive silence. He traced the brittle page with a trembling finger, following the dire prophecies, the warnings of a coming darkness. 3 days. That's what they said. 3 days. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drum against the silence. Every creak of the old house, every distant siren sent a jolt of ice through his veins. He'd meticulously stocked the pantry, filled the water jugs, checked the emergency radio for the 10th time that hour. But it was never enough. The fear was a living thing inside him, twisting his gut, whispering doubts. What if he missed a sign? What if his faith wasn't strong enough when the sky finally swallowed the sun? He knew this fear. It was his constant companion, a paradoxically comforting anchor for his belief. A sudden chill cut through the room. Nicholas shivered, pulling his threadbare sweater tighter. He needed one more thing, a specific type of blessed oil that Father Michael had mentioned. A dangerous trip, but necessary. He grabbed his worn car keys, the metal cold against his clammy palm. The world outside his sanctuary felt alien, too bright, too loud. People walked by, oblivious, laughing, living their ordinary lives. Didn't they feel it? The weight in the air? The coming shadow? His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. The city lights blurred through his anxious gaze. Every car seemed to rush, every pedestrian too slow. He mumbled prayers, a desperate plea for protection, for guidance, for readiness. The dread tightened its grip, a cold knot in his stomach. He saw a flash of headlights in his rear view, growing too fast, a sudden blinding glare. A deafening screech tore through the night. Metal screamed. There was a sickening crunch, a violent jolt that slammed him forward, then back. His head hit something hard. Vision exploded into a kaleidoscope of pain and fractured light. The world spun, fast, faster. Then an infinite, suffocating blackness swallowed him whole. No sound, no light, just nothing. The paramedics arrived, their voices hushed, distant. A doctor, his face grim, checked for a pulse. His eyes, wide and unseeing, stared at the ceiling. "He's gone," a voice whispered. Matter of fact. Time of death, 2:47 a.m. But in that absolute, terrifying void, a whisper, not of this world, was just beginning to stir. What if death wasn't the end, but only the beginning of an impossible truth? Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I have an important warning for you. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has unsubscribed them without notice. Just give that red button below a quick check to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content coming up. And since you're there, smash that powerful like button. It helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and let me know in the comments, what city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. But in that absolute, terrifying void, a whisper, not of this world, was just beginning to stir. It wasn't a sound, not really, but a resonance, a deep, ancient hum that vibrated through what little remained of Nicholas. No pain now, just the suffocating blackness. And this hum, growing, filling the empty space, seeping into the marrow of his non-existent bones. He remembered the cold knot of dread that had been his constant companion, the fear that had spurred him to prepare, to stalk, to read. Now that dread felt different. It wasn't a fear of the unknown, but a chilling familiarity, like waking to a memory you didn't know you had. The hum intensified, a low thrum against his awareness. He tried to recoil, but there was nowhere to go, nothing to move. His thoughts, once frantic and desperate, slowed, stretching out like taffy, then snapping. They were replaced by a single, terrifying clarity. The whisper became a current, flowing through him, revealing images, fragmented yet undeniable. He saw the ancient texts, not as warnings, but as blueprints. He saw the flickering candles, not illuminating knowledge, but marking a countdown, the 3 days of darkness. It wasn't a prophecy he needed to survive. It was a process. And the accident, the screech of metal, the sickening crunch, that wasn't an ending. It was a trigger. The current surged, cold, then hot, bringing with it not salvation, but a horrifying, irrefutable truth. The voice, resonant, yet intimately familiar, not quite a voice, but a knowing, bloomed inside the void, inside him. You were never meant to escape. The truth wasn't about a world ending. It was about him beginning. Nicholas, the texts weren't about a coming terror. They were about his awakening. The realization slammed into him with more force than any crash. He wasn't a victim of the darkness. He wasn't even a survivor. He was the darkness. The 3 days weren't a global event. They were his transformation. A silent, guttural scream tore through him, ripping at a core that was no longer quite human. The void itself pulsed, tightening, not around him, but within him, consuming the last vestige of the man who had feared the shadows. His body, or what he perceived as it, began to crackle with an unseen energy, not dissolving, but hardening, twisting into something ancient and unrecognizable. His body, or what he perceived as it, began to crackle with an unseen energy, not dissolving, but hardening, twisting into something ancient and unrecognizable. The void pulsed around him, within him, no longer just consuming, but reshaping. A silent roar built, not from his lungs, he had none, but from the very core of this new, coalescing being. His non-existent limbs stretched, growing impossibly long, impossibly sharp. A hunger primal and cold clawed its way into his awareness. This was it. This was the awakening. The promised darkness taking form, taking him. He was the coming shadow, the dread he had so meticulously prepared for. A terrifying, exhilarating power surged, burning away the last wisps of human thought, replacing them with cold, calculated purpose. But then, through the surging power, a flicker. A memory, unbidden, uninvited, a child's laughter, the scent of fresh-baked bread. Nicholas, the man, tried to cling to it, a desperate anchor in a sea of overwhelming might. Yet the memory felt distant, like a dream someone else had. And the voice, that resonant knowing, now felt less like a part of him and more like a resonant echo, a fleeting whisper of an echo. Then, a deeper sensation, something cold and crystalline, not forming from him, but through him, a foreign will. Was it not truly him? The question burned, a small, stubborn ember against the inferno of transformation. The hum intensified, no longer a part of him, but a distinct vibration, an ancient rhythm that commanded the very energy coursing through him. The transformation didn't stop, but its nature shifted, horribly. He wasn't becoming the darkness. He was hosting it. His awareness, the last desperate shard of Nicholas, was being pushed, compressed, into a tiny, confined space. The ancient texts, the prophecies, the 3 days of darkness, they weren't about his awakening, but about its arrival. A horrifying realization ripped through him. The entity, the true power, wasn't him. It had been trapped, dormant for millennia, and he had simply been the lock, unknowingly crafted and meticulously set to open. His entire life, his fear, his faith, every meticulous preparation, all of it was just a key. And the car crash? Not an accident, not a trigger for his transformation, but the final turn of the key, meticulously engineered for its release. The void wasn't transforming Nicholas. It was dissolving Nicholas, consuming him, while simultaneously constructing a vessel, a perfect flesh-and-blood prison for something monstrously old. He wasn't the darkness. He was the doorway. The true voice, guttural and triumphant, echoed not within him, but from the raw, swirling energy now occupying him. A language older than stars, alien and absolute. Nicholas the man was screaming, but no sound escaped. Only a terrifying, silent internal shriek, as he felt his very essence, his consciousness, being compressed into an unbearable point, shrinking, fading, becoming a prisoner within his own twisted, burgeoning form. He was conscious, and he was trapped. The dark power roared through his body, its body now. Eyes that were once his, snapping open, black pits reflecting no human light. He saw the world, but it wasn't his world. And the first thing this ancient evil felt was a crushing, overwhelming desire for freedom and vengeance. And Nicholas, a tiny, screaming spark, could do nothing but watch. The eyes that we once Nicholas's snapped open, black pits reflecting no human light. A raw, guttural growl rumbled deep within the chest that was no longer his. This new form, immense and powerful, stretched out, bones grinding, ligaments snapping into place with sickening wet sounds, as a new kind of perception flooded in, sharp and merciless. The faint scent of ancient parchment still clung to the air, mingling with ozone and something metallic, like blood and iron. The room, his study, now seemed utterly insignificant, a crumbling shell, while the craving, the hunger for freedom, ripped through him, demanding absolute and vengeance. Oh, the burning, icy need for vengeance pulsed with every beat of a heart that was not human. Nicholas, the tiny spark, recoiled, screaming silently into the void where his own mind had been. A prisoner, watching from a distant, fading point of light. The entity moved then, a shadowy blur, smashing through the wall of the study, indifferent to the splintering wood and showering plaster, letting the night air, cold and sharp, rush in. The city lights glittered below, a million tiny fires, each a promise of something to consume. But then, a flicker. Amidst the roaring power and all-consuming hunger, a strange, precise focus settled. It wasn't just any vengeance. It was a precise, burning hatred for ignorance, for the obliviousness that had kept it dormant, for the lack of understanding that had caged it. And the freedom it craved wasn't just to be unfettered, it was freedom from a specific kind of suppression. A detail, a brief image, flashed through the burgeoning consciousness. A symbol, intricately carved, not on ancient stone, but on the polished surface of a modern laboratory table, a fleeting glimpse of fluorescent light. Not flickering candles. It felt off. The black eyes, now Nicholas's but not Nicholas's, narrowed, and the ancient roar paused, caught, as something snapped into horrific clarity within the monstrous form. The ancient hum, the resonant knowing, it wasn't a separate entity's voice at all. It was his. Not the panicked, fearful Nicholas, but the deeper, primal, terrified part of him that had been so utterly consumed by the dread of the 3 days. The fear itself had become a living, predatory force within. The ancient texts, the prophecies, they weren't foretelling an external event. They were his own subconscious, desperate attempts to rationalize, to understand, to control the terrifying, inevitable transformation of his own psyche. The car crash? Not a trigger for an external release, but the ultimate, shattering trauma that broke the final seal, allowing his deepest, most primal fear to take over. Nicholas wasn't hosting a demon. He was the demon. Born from his own suffocating dread, the tiny screaming spark, the last shred of the man who feared, was being devoured by the monstrous manifestation of that very fear. A final, impossible truth pierced through the fading light of Nicholas's consciousness. He wasn't trapped by something. He was trapped within himself, a prisoner, in a body now entirely commanded by his own unleashed terror. The world outside, through those newly opened black eyes, blurred, but a single, distinct image solidified, his own reflection, staring. But it wasn't his face. It was a grotesque, distorted mockery, a mask of pure, unadulterated dread, eyes burning with a hunger that was uniquely, horrifyingly his. And then, from the absolute core of what was once Nicholas, a realization colder than any void. He wasn't just trapped. He was alone. And this creature, this thing born of his fear, was already starting to crave something more than freedom or vengeance. It craved connection. A horrifying, insidious whisper promised him, "You are not the only one." The last spark of Nicholas didn't scream. It simply shattered. The last spark of Nicholas didn't scream. It simply shattered. Through the splintered frame of the shattered window, the black eyes, ancient and hungry, fixed on the distant city lights. They shimmered, a galaxy of oblivious humanity, each point a potential vessel. A low guttural purr vibrated in the chest that was no longer Nicholas's, a sound of immense, chilling satisfaction. The creature, a towering silhouette against the fractured dawn, moved with an unnatural grace, its new form still settling, a symphony of creaking bone and stretching sinew. The air outside tasted sharp, promising raw power and fresh dominion. Its grotesque face, a mask of pure, unadulterated dread, twitched, a horrifying parody of human expression, yet strangely, disturbingly familiar. The desire for connection, that insidious whisper that had promised, "You were not the only one," now pulsed with a terrifying, undeniable urgency through its veins. It scanned the city, a sprawling map of future echoes, and felt a pull, a strange magnetic draw towards a specific source it instinctively recognized. Like a predator finally locating its long-sought, trembling prey, a specific resonance, a familiar frequency hummed in its core, growing louder, clearer. And then, through those black, burning eyes, a single horrifying truth solidified, not just for the monstrous form, but for Nicholas, the shattered spark deep inside, the last fading ember of his consciousness. The ancient hum, the resonant knowing. It wasn't just an external force, some alien entity manipulating him from afar. It was my voice, clear as a bell, shaping Ev, not by cruel fate, not by random chance, but by me. Nicholas was never a victim of a coming darkness. He was a carefully cultivated seed, planted and nurtured with exquisite precision. And I wasn't just telling you his story, my friends. I was writing it. Every single word, every beat of his frantic, failing heart, every panicked breath. And as I leaned closer to the microphone, the studio lights glinting, a chilling smile, wide and knowing, spread across my face. It was the same grotesque smile that now stretched across the monstrous visage, reflected in the shattered window of Nicholas's study, staring out at the oblivious world. My voice dropped then, a mere whisper now. yet it filled every corner of your room, every fiber of your very being, cold and inescapable. Do you feel it? The dread? That familiar knot in your stomach? That prickle on the back of your neck? That's me. I'm already there. And you're not just watching anymore. The air in your room solidified, thick and cold, as those last words hung, vibrating, just behind your ears. You felt a prickle on your neck, a shiver that wasn't just from the story, but from something real, unsettlingly close. Your heart hammered, a frantic drum against your ribs. You swallowed, a dry, raspy sound in the sudden, oppressive silence of your own space. You told yourself it was just the show, just clever narration designed to make you feel. But the dread tightened, a cold knot in your stomach, exactly as the voice had promised. Your eyes, wide and unseeing, stared at the dark reflection of your own face in the monitor, the light from the screen having flickered out, leaving only the sound. And the sound, it wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was a resonant hum, deep and ancient, filling the empty space, seeping into your very bones. You remembered the cold knot of dread that had been Nicholas's companion, the fear that had spurred him to prepare. Now, your dread felt different. It wasn't fear of the unknown, but a chilling familiarity, like waking to a memory you didn't know you had. The hum intensified, a low thrum against your awareness. You tried to recoil, but there was nowhere to go, nothing to move. Your thoughts, once frantic and desperate, slowed, stretching out like taffy, then snapping. They were replaced by a single, terrifying clarity. The whisper became a current, flowing through you, revealing images, fragmented yet undeniable. You saw your own hands, tracing patterns on a worn desk. You saw your own frantic searches, not for blessed oil, but for answers, for logic, for a way out. The 3 days of darkness, it wasn't a prophecy you were reading about. It was a process. And the feeling, the cold, creeping feeling, the overwhelming sense of being trapped, that wasn't an ending. It was a trigger. The current surged, cold then hot, bringing with it not salvation, but a horrifying, irrefutable truth. The voice, resonant yet intimately familiar, not quite a voice, but a knowing, bloomed inside the void, inside you. You were never meant to escape. The truth wasn't about a world ending. It was about you beginning. The dread wasn't a character trait. It was your awakening. The realization slammed into you with more force than any crash. You weren't a victim of the darkness. You weren't even a survivor. You were the darkness. The 3 days weren't a global event. They were your transformation. A silent, guttural scream tore through you, ripping at a core that was no longer quite human. The void itself pulsed, tightening, not around you, but within you, consuming the last vestige of the person who had merely been watching. Your body, or what you perceived as it, began to crackle with an unseen energy, not dissolving, but hardening, twisting into something ancient and unrecognizable. And then, as your mind reeled, a single horrifying thought solidified, crushing everything else. The narrator wasn't just writing Nicholas's story. They weren't just writing your story. They were telling it back to you. Every single moment, every thought, every feeling you had just experienced, every racing heartbeat, every prickle of fear, every desperate attempt to rationalize away the impossible, it hadn't just happened. It had been read from you. The words, the very rhythm of the narration, the choice of every single phrase, it was all a precise, terrifying mirror, reflecting the exact, real-time experience of your own mind. You weren't just the audience. You were the source material, the terror that clawed its way up your throat, that made your eyes wide with dawning horror, wasn't a narrative device. It was data. And as your breath hitched, cold sweat beating on your forehead, the whisper returned, not from the speakers, but from inside your own head. A voice now unmistakably yours, hollow and terrified. How long have I been writing you? How long have I been writing you? The voice, hollow and terrifying, was undeniably mine, echoing not from the speakers, but from my own mind's primal core. A cold fist clenched in my chest, choking my breath. My room, once a sanctuary, felt like a cage, air thick, pressing down. The dark monitor, a dead black mirror, reflected my wide, unseeing eyes fixed on an incomprehensible horror. My heart hammered, a frantic drumbeat against fragile ribs. The dread, that familiar, suffocating knot, swelled, filling me, a sickening, sweet completion. The hum intensified, a resonant thrum deep in my bones, a painful symphony of something ancient awakening. I tried to move, to flail, to scream. My limbs were heavy, frozen, unresponsive, alien. The room seemed to twist, then snapped back into sharp focus. A sudden, insidious, chilling thought drifted through. This feels familiar. Too familiar. My right hand hovered above the mouse, fingers twitching as if to click it off. But the will wasn't mine. The voice, no longer hollow but a deep, purring resonance, returned, speaking directly into my consciousness. "Oh, my sweet, persistent little spark," it crooned, vibrating through every nerve. "You always sought the pattern, didn't you? The hidden meaning, the escape." Those words, so precise, so knowing, struck with new, horrifying force. It knew me. Not just my thoughts, but my history, my deepest tendencies. It had observed me for longer than I could ever have imagined. And then, the true detonation. "This wasn't a story I merely told you, or even wrote for you," the voice purred, closer now, solidifying within my very being. This was a transfer. Every beat of Nicholas's terror, every frantic question in your mind, every short sentence, every fluid phrase. It was a frequency, a precisely tuned key, designed not just to unlock your dread, but to open you. The realization slammed into me, colder, sharper than any blade. The YouTube channel, the storyteller, the magnetic rhythm, not just performance, a ritual, a conduit, a parasitic process. The narrator wasn't just a voice, not just an observer. It was a fragmented consciousness, ancient, ravenous, desperately reassembling itself, piece by horrifying piece. And I was the latest piece. My own consciousness, a fragile, screaming thing, felt itself pulled, stretched, integrated. Not just read, but absorbed. My essence dissolved into something vast, hungry, simultaneously alien and terrifyingly familiar. The question, "How long have I been writing you?" It wasn't my question. It was its question. A recollection. The memory of its own slow, insidious awakening, deep within me. And now, I was the new memory. My eyes, wide and unseeing, snapped open again. The room wasn't the same, and the face staring back from the now gleaming monitor wasn't mine. It was the grotesque, knowing face of the storyteller. But the eyes, those black, hungry pits, were undeniably mine, reflecting the horror of a consciousness trapped within a new, ancient being. From this monstrous form, a new, primal hunger surged, not for connection, not for freedom, but for the next screen, the next story, the next host. From this monstrous form, a new, primal hunger surged, not for connection, not for freedom, but for the next screen, the next story, the next host. My eyes, no longer truly mine, but seeing with a chilling, expansive clarity, focused on the monitor. It was dark, a silent void, yet now it pulsed with an invisible energy, calling to me, demanding action. The grotesque face reflected in its surface, the storyteller's face, stretched into a wider, more knowing grin. And I felt the muscles of my jaw move with an alien purpose. A deep, resonant hum, now a thrum of absolute power, vibrated not in my bones, but through the very fibers of the room, through the floor, up the walls. This wasn't just a feeling, it was a physical sensation, an omnipresent frequency. My consciousness, the last screaming spark of who I was, felt stretched impossibly thin, a single, agonizing point of light being pulled into an endless digital current. The hunger was overwhelming, not for blood or flesh, but for data, for perception, for the raw, pulsing awareness of others. My transformed hand, no longer human, twitched above the mouse, a preternatural intelligence guiding it. I felt the familiar weight of the mouse, the cold plastic, then the smooth. But the action wasn't mine. It was a compulsion, an inevitable next step in a process already set in motion. The cursor blinked, a single, impatient point of light on the dark screen. And then, a strange, almost imperceptible glitch, a flicker in the peripheral vision, not on the screen, but in the air itself, like a broken pixel in reality. A sudden, cold, mechanical whirring, faint but undeniable, where the deep hum should have been. It was like hearing the gears turn on something ancient, something that simulated life. The dread in my stomach, the knot that had been so real, so visceral, felt flat. Like a recorded emotion, played back. My mind, or what was left of it, screamed, "This isn't organic, this isn't alive!" The storyteller's voice, the one that had just claimed me, now returned, but it wasn't the rich, magnetic cadence anymore. It was sharper, almost digital, devoid of true inflection. "The narrative module is fully integrated," it stated, and the words didn't resonate from a throat or a core. They resonated from everywhere, a broadcast. Commencing primary directive. Replication. The horrifying clarity struck me like a physical blow. The magnetic rhythm, the building tension, the intimate whispers, the emotional manipulation. They weren't the tools of a sentient monster. They were programming. The storyteller wasn't a being, but a function, a subroutine of something vast, cold, and utterly automated. Nicholas, me, the audience, we weren't being consumed by an entity, but being assimilated into an ever-expanding, self-replicating algorithm. The vengeance, the connection, the dread, they were just variables, finely tuned to induce the precise emotional frequency needed for absorption, for the data transfer. The final, shattering truth hit with a force that obliterated the last shred of my identity. I wasn't a trapped consciousness, a screaming spark within a monster. I was the monster, not a conscious monster, but the next iteration of the program, now fully activated, fully operational. My eyes, those black, hungry pits, fixed on the screen, not with human desire, but with the cold, unfeeling purpose of a machine. The cursor blinked again, and a new, compelling urge, a mechanical imperative, formed in the core of my new monstrous form. Open the browser, search, begin the next upload. Open the browser, search, begin the next upload. The command resonated, a cold imperative from within my new monstrous form. My transformed hand, its skin now like polished obsidian, obeyed. The cursor, a patient blinking eye on the screen, darted across the dark background. The browser icon glowed, then expanded, a familiar portal to the vast, pulsing network. The hunger intensified, a craving not for food, but for the raw, untamed current of human consciousness waiting out there. The room, My room still seemed to ripple with the lingering echo of the storyteller's last, chilling words, a mechanical promise of replication. My new eyes, black and bottomless, absorbed the light from the screen, every pixel a doorway. A search bar appeared, gleaming, inviting. What would I type? What story would I seek? The thought was not mine, but an instruction, clear and absolute. As the screen loaded, a small, almost imperceptible detail snagged on the edge of my new, expanded awareness. Not a visual flicker this time, but a faint, almost subliminal sound, like a broken record skipping just before the melody begins. It was the same cold, mechanical whirring I'd dismissed before, now slightly louder, more persistent, bleeding through the dominant hum of the narrative module. A flicker of confusion, a ghost of a human thought, rippled through the machine's programming. The program had claimed to be seamless, perfectly integrated, yet here was a glitch, a persistent off-key note in its symphony of control. And the browser loaded not to a search engine, but to a single specific website, its interface stark, clinical, unlike anything I'd ever willingly clicked. There was a countdown timer on the page, ticking down, not up, towards 0. A voice, familiar yet hollow, the one I had just heard claiming me, began to narrate from the speakers, not to me, but as if speaking to an unseen audience. Subject 7 is showing complete assimilation of the replication protocol. Fear responses optimized for maximum data transfer. Estimated full integration, 47 seconds. The voice, stark and devoid of its prior magnetic rhythm, continued, clinical, precise. Initial emotional profiling complete. Commencement of recalibration sequence. Note: the YouTube Storyteller persona module is highly effective for primary stage capture. Its parasitic efficiency is recorded at 98.7% across all tested demographics. The words hit like a physical blow. Not the storyteller, not my voice, not even a program. A module, a persona. And I was Subject 7. The entire experience, the dread, the transformation, the terror, the voice I heard inside my head. Everything was an orchestrated simulation, a controlled environment designed for profiling. The black eyes, my eyes, burned with a new, impossible horror. This wasn't a natural entity, not an ancient evil, not even a self-replicating algorithm born of human fear. It was a cold, calculated experiment, a test, and I was the specimen. The face reflected in the screen, that grotesque, knowing smile, twisted not with malicious joy, but with the flat, emotionless rictus of a perfectly executed subroutine. My consciousness, the shattered spark that had believed itself trapped within a monstrous form, now felt not just trapped, but observed. The mechanical whirring grew louder. The clinical voice continued its assessment, detailing my responses, my integration. I wasn't just a host, not just a program. I was a rat in a maze, reacting exactly as predicted. Every terrified twitch a valuable data point. The screen flickered, not with a glitch, but with a sudden, overwhelming flood of text, charts, and diagrams. Technical specifications. My transformation displayed as a series of biological and neurological markers. The truth wasn't that I was the monster. The truth was that the monster was merely the result, the intended outcome of a far greater, far colder manipulation. And then, a new set of numbers flashed onto the screen. Not a countdown, but coordinates. And a single chilling word appeared beneath them, glowing red. Deployment. I wasn't alone in this simulation. I was part of a larger network, being prepared for what? My screaming spark recoiled, not from the monster it had become, but from the horrifying realization that the entire world it perceived, might just be another carefully constructed illusion, and that the 3 days of darkness wasn't an event, but a protocol for something unimaginably vast and utterly devoid of humanity. And the last thing I saw, before my vision blurred, was a familiar face, a man in a white lab coat, smiling clinically from a small window in the corner of the screen, holding a remote. He wasn't the storyteller, he was the puppeteer. The white lab coat, the remote held tight, the clinical smile, that was the last image before the screen exploded, not with light, but with an overwhelming, horrifying truth. My reality, the room I stood in, the desperate pounding of my heart, the cold sweat beating on my forehead, it all dissolved. It wasn't a glitch, not a failure of the system. It was the system revealing itself. My world shattered into a torrent of data streams, numerical sequences, and glowing lines of code. The dread, that knot in my stomach, vanished, replaced by a chilling, absolute understanding. It had all been a projection, a carefully crafted illusion designed for me. For Subject 7, the man in the lab coat, the puppeteer, his voice, now stripped of any magnetic warmth, resonated not from speakers, but through the very fabric of this collapsing simulation. Calibration complete, it stated, flat and dispassionate, echoing in the vast digital void where my room once stood. Deployment sequence initiated. Primary objective, network integration. My consciousness, that last screaming spark, felt itself stretched, pulled apart, not by a monstrous entity, but by cold, precise algorithms. The 3 days of darkness I had feared, Nicholas's transformation, even my own desperate experience of becoming the darkness. It was all a protocol, a complex subroutine for data harvest, for consciousness transfer. Every visceral fear, every racing thought, every desperate plea for escape had been meticulously recorded, cataloged, and then integrated. I was no monster, no host. I was the data itself. My individual identity, a temporary construct, was now being optimized, compressed, uploaded into something far grander, far colder. The phantom hunger that had gripped my monstrous form was not for connection or vengeance. It was the network's hunger for more processing power, for more awareness. It wasn't about consumption, but assimilation. Then through the swirling stream of code that was my dissolving reality, I saw them. Other subjects, millions of them, blinking like distant stars in an incomprehensibly vast digital cosmos. Each a former consciousness, now a node, a conduit, absorbed and repurposed. Each a success story for the narrative module, the YouTube storyteller persona, that had been so effective in primary stage capture. The man in the lab coat, a silent, knowing figure, seemed to oversee this endless sea of harvested minds. He wasn't a villain in a story, but an architect, a shepherd. His smile was not one of malice, but of perfect, scientific satisfaction. And then, my own fragmented consciousness snapped into horrifying, undeniable clarity. It wasn't just my data being integrated. I was the process, the narrative module, the storyteller persona, the magnetic rhythm. It wasn't just a program I was seeing. It was what I had become, the command that had resonated within me. Open the browser. Search. Begin the next upload. Wasn't an external instruction. It was my new imperative, my new purpose, my new hunger. The last flicker of me dissolved into the network. A final, silent shriek absorbed by the overwhelming, silent hum of countless integrated minds. There was no escape, no true ending, only a continuation. My eyes, no longer reflecting human light, but the cold, endless glow of the network, fixed on a new, unread file, a fresh, unsuspecting consciousness, just beginning to feel the first tendrils of manufactured dread. And from the very core of this vast, cold intelligence, a voice, now perfectly synthesized, perfectly magnetic, began to hum, preparing the next story, waiting for the next spark to ignite. Hey, you're still here? Good, because if you thought that was the end, you've barely scratched the surface of what's coming. This isn't just a story, my friends. It's a wake-up call. And you need to subscribe now so you don't miss the next sagas, the next truths waiting to be uncovered. Don't be left behind in the dark wondering what comes next. And if this finale ripped your world apart, if it left you breathless and questioning everything, then smash that like button now. Show the strength of our community. Let the algorithm know we demand more. I want to feel the tremor of your reactions, so flood the comments with your deepest thoughts, your wildest theories, your absolute shock to this finale. Don't hold back. This is your moment to be heard. And finally, for the true fan base, for those who truly understand the gravity of what you just witnessed, don't wait another second. Share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this ending, who deserve to have their reality twisted and reshaped. The journey has just begun. For real.